tropical agricultural based countries in the world. In fact, there are at least 13 countries having this common etiological disorder that actually kills about 30 to 40,000 of mostly male farmers each year. So what you're going to do today is to go through this very basics of chronic kidney disease of multifactorial origin, and then we'll see we can cover the areas like common etiological factors, mechanisms, and ways to eradicate this dangerous and deadly disease. So here's what our learning objectives for today. Firstly, the generation of chronic diseases in general, so that we can get a clue on what's happening on chronic kidney disease of uncertain origin. Then you're talking about the chronic kidney disease itself, then the statistics pertinent to Sri Lanka, and then the current status, and indeed number of postulators factors we are going to discuss. Then finally, the mechanism of renal tubular damage, and we'll discuss who is vulnerable and various ways available today we can eradicate CKDu from a given country. Now, first, basically we need to understand that most of the chronic disease has environmental etiology. In fact, some of these started as when we are in the utero, in fact the maternal womb. So that maternal environment and then the genetic influence which can modify through the environment through epigenetic changes, all these can be again further modified by the mindfulness or lack of mindfulness, then leads to chronic diseases. So you should see that there are several areas in this figure. You can see that we can intervene to reduce the incidence of chronic diseases, especially starting from the maternal environment, maternal mindfulness, nutrition, and the avoiding of harmful habits like smoking and drinking. So the chronic kidney disease of unknown etiology is in fact environmentally induced chronic occupational disease that affecting predominantly male farmers. In the case of Sri Lanka, approximately 5,000 of these young male farmers are dying each year from chronic kidney disease. The ratio to male to female is something close to about 8 to 2. Moreover, this amounts to about 13 deaths each day, amounting to 13 families are becoming destitute each day. So unlike folk like you in the cities, they do not have the bank accounts or enough facilities to maintain their families once the breadwinner is succumbed to this disease. To date, the CKDu has killed about 80,000 Sri Lankans, which is more than killed by the 2004 tsunami. Moreover, currently it's estimated that 240,000 people are affected in Sri Lanka. So here's the survival of males we published a couple of years ago over the next 35 years in the North Central Province, which is the mostly affected province in Sri Lanka. Here what you're looking at is the number of years on the x-axis and the predicted proportion of the males surviving in the North Central Province in Sri Lanka. So we start as 100%, and then we extrapolated the data up to 2015. Now, please consider a focus on this black line, which is the currently estimated death rate. So whether that death rate increased by even 1% a year, we can have tremendous further negative effects. You can see that by 2042, the survival number of farmers is about 20% of what we are having today. So this is a disaster for the country, and as is shown in a couple of slides, is clearly and majorly affecting the rice output and agricultural output not only in the north central province, but it will affect the entire country, necessitating significant increase of importation of the food for food security. Here are some examples of rice production changes, which, which is secondary to decreasing of the male population. Even today, the rice production has continued to decrease, and we are already importing rice from Bangladesh in particular. Moreover, compared to Sri Lankan rice, imported rice from most other South Asian countries are known to contaminate with the more heavy metals, arsenic, etc. No rice in the world has zero contaminant, so as other food. So it's not a brainer that importing rice from other countries is not going to be helpful in reducing the incidence of chronic diseases. Moreover, the opportunity cost and the loss of productivity together with the dialysis cost are approximately 3 billion rupees a year. So the government is losing 3 billion rupees a year just because of having the disease. So this is an important slide for you to understand the predicted pattern of changing the number of male farmers as depicted in the red and the rice output depicted in the blue. As you see that two curves are almost parallel, going downwards, proportionately to the available male farmers who are predominantly doing the rice cultivation. So as you see, the arable land has not going to be changed. It continues to be stable, yet number of farmers reduced, and therefore the rice output, as you see, is significantly reduced over time, necessitating more and more importation. Here's a slide with data we published as a causation pyramid of CKDu. If you look at the bottom part, it's the number of socio-economic factors are foundationally affecting the issue. Deviation of the well-established healthy practices, diet, and abandoning these things has causes lifestyle changes, especially the food and farming habits, together with the overpopulation and consequent inadequate consumption, lack of clean water and sanitation, together with the policies and lack of enforcement of the laws and the lack of mindfulness, clearly is affecting the increasing incidence or the prevalence of chronic kidney disease of uncertain etiology in Sri Lanka. So the patterns is not changing, but the disease prevalence is increasing. Here's a slide just to show the appearance of the longitudinal section of a normal kidney compared to kidney of the person who died from chronic kidney disease of uncertain etiology. You can see the macroscopically or visually the marked differences of the kidney, and this is the non-functioning kidney, whereas compared to functioning kidney on your left side. So the irreversible kidney failure occurs when the CKDu reach the stage CKD stage 3B. So the prevention effort must be enforced or influenced prior to this stage of CKD3. Then the kidneys can be recoverable and the patient will get back to normal lifestyle. So a lot of scientists have proposed and the organization have proposed a number of factors or causes for CKDu. The list goes more than 30. I just put some of the key factors people talking about. So the problem is that as I insist from 2001, CKDu is due to multiple factors, and although all the scientists are saying their own hypothesis is correct and everybody is not correct, But the fact remains that it's very likely that it's due to the multiple factors acting together, causing the renal harm and irreversible damage to the kidneys, leading to kidney failure and causing premature death of mostly male farmers. So the combination of some of these are more likely to cause the disease. However, the cooperation between scientists are clearly lacking at the current moment. This is a complex slide just to show you that the multifactorial etiology of the genesis of chronic kidney disease of uncertain origin. One of the reds are the red side or the left side are the environmental pollutant and the factors related to water pollution. Whereas one in green on your right side is a sociological, behavioral, demographic, and the interaction that could lead to renal harm and renal failure. It's highly unlikely that there's a genetic susceptibility, and there's no data, convincing data available today to show genetic vulnerability. So the disease is a multifactorial, and therefore the approaches has to be multifactorial or multidisciplinary to overcome the difficulties and prevent the disease. So I put this slide together to show the complexity of the disease, and this the one is the ovals show the various postulated factors or groups of factors have thought to cause the deadly disease affecting farming communities. Moreover, the ovals below the line show that the broader groups like malnutrition, poverty, climate change, insufficient available treatment, agrochemical, together with the lack of priority and the policies by the government, is creating a negative vicious cycle that causing chronic disease affecting this population. So this will be postulated causes, condition, but eventually it affects the kidneys, kidney functions goes down, and beyond CKD stage 3B, kidneys become irreparably damaged. Therefore, people are going to need dialysis, and eventually, within 2 to 5 years, virtually most of these people are going to die. So this is a summary of multiple factors I put together to show the environment pollution. You can start from the home factors like detergent, gases, but many of these, the phosphate detergent had been banned from other countries, then the industrial chemical, so as the farming factors and polluting the environment. Deforestation is very important because it causes soil erosion. The soil in water is a contaminated water. So excess use of agrochemical, water and food contamination, all this can lead to different types of chronic diseases. And these together can cause loss of life, especially the premature deaths of chronically exposed people. So let's look at some of the clues where we could understand that the CKDu is a waterborne disease. There could be a small component of food, but predominantly it seems to be coming from water. Here are some examples, in fact, some clues. CKDu is less prevalent in villages supplied by surface water, like in Nuoravava, Tisavava, and these are large tanks, and people who drink water from these tanks have got a low incidence of the disease. Secondly, the low prevalence in areas where the groundwater recharge from the river Mahavali, the longest river in Sri Lanka. Similarly, those who drink water from natural springs had the lowest incidence in the region of North Central Province. Clearly, the natural springs has got a naturally purified, clean water, which is far better than the drinking from the dug wells as in other part of the affected regions. So what are the other factors or the clues we can obtained or learned from data to date. When you look at the scientific, demographic, and consumption data, it all suggests towards water as a carrier of CKDu. Therefore, it's a no-brainer that the importance of providing clean water to all affected regions and surrounding regions to prevent this disease happening and spreading. Higher prevalence present of the areas with the hard water, perhaps magnesium, and together with fluoride, which is another hypothesis currently being investigated. In addition, there is a correlation between the drinking water, when I say drinking and cooking, and the causation of CKDu in Sri Lanka, so as actually elsewhere like Central American region as well. Here's this data we published sometime back, a couple of years ago, on population prevalence of CKD, which is in the blue, in this black line, together with the total number of CKDu in North Central province. Difference between the those lines are the one depicted in the figure B, which shows incidence of CKDu in the NCP or the North Central province. Slide on your left shows the distribution of CKDu in Sri Lanka. Started in the North Central province, now it has been gradually spreading outside areas. As you see, it's a time-wise, it's actually spreading more and more outside and indeed to a distant region, including the Hambantota area and few cases now appearing in the north. Slide on the right shows the groundwater hardness, which as you see, there's no correlation between the groundwater hardness, which is a calcium measurement, and the distribution of the CKDu in Sri Lanka, so as any other part of the world for that matter. Slide on the right shows the fluoride distribution of Sri Lanka, and there is some correlation between the fluoride in water and the distribution of CKD, or number of patients and the families distributed in Sri Lanka. Although the most people in the country believe that agrochemical cause the disease, to date there's no data at all to support scientifically that agrochemical actually causing the disease. However, there could be an association. Association is most certainly not the causation of the disease. For example, the highest use of agrochemical is in the central province, Nuwara area, but they don't have a single patient with suffering from this particular disease. How come? So in this case, clearly there's no association between those two areas. This is data published by the Disanayake et al. In CMJ in 2015, looking at the distribution of household with the CKD used by the Geographical Information System, showing a key factor, which is affected households are located in low-lying areas, i.e. below the level of the reservoirs like this, and also the irrigation canal. So there's a low-lying area giving some clues that something to do with the surface water drainage and how these wells, shallow wells, are getting contaminated. What we do not know actually, what is a contaminant in this water is causing the disease. As I mentioned before, the natural springs water is very clean, and the people who drink from these natural wells are protected from this disease. So many people are coming in vehicles and collecting water on a daily basis for personal consumption. So let's look at the real world solution for clean water, what's applicable for developing countries. Provision of pipe-borne water is important, provided that the method is enough to adequate removal of all these. Natural spring water, rainwater collection can be a complementary, so as well water and reverse osmosis clean water. The areas which I strike down, like boiling cold water, water transportation, etc., they are environmentally harmful and not cost effective. In fact, these are the most cost effective modes of having clean water for any given society. And we should avoid these things and use the more economical cost effective method as indicated above. So what are the facts and data that supports the CKD is contracted through consuming drinking water? Let's have a look at that. Explore the possibility of drinking water as the causative agent. So these are some of the facts should be considered. Rice and vegetable consumption in affected and non-affected regions are similar. So highly unlikely that it's coming from the food because no difference between the consumption pattern. A large proportion of rice and vegetable produced and in the CKD affected region like Wu province and the North Central are consumed by the people in other parts of the world, particularly the central and western provinces where there are no patients with CKDu currently. However, the key differences is the quality of drinking and cooking water. So that's why people need to concentrate on their research and identify the causative factors. Let me give some basic research data. And this is a sample of just over 450 subjects we collected, looking at the types of the chronic diseases in the North Central province. So as you see, the chronic CKDu has the highest, which is about 73% of the people with the chronic kidney disease having CKDu. About 10% each with hypertension and diabetic mellitus, and about 5% of chronic kidney disease are due to other causes like following snake bites and various types of glomerular nephritis leading to CKD. So the important fact actually in somebody from the North Central province having CKD, they have a 3 out of 4 chance, which is about 75% chance that they are having CKDu and not common garden CKD due to other reasons like hypertension, diabetes, or snake bite. So let's look at different aspects. I already mentioned that people who drink from spring water has less incidence. Here's some examples. It's a smaller sample, 136 subject in the same area. So the people who, if you look at the males first, you can see that the people who drink well water has got a markedly higher incidence of CKDu compared to people who drink from the from the springs. Similarly, if you look at the females, you have a similar ratio. And the male to female ratio, as you see, that's huge in these regions. When you look at the other CKDs, you also see the male to female ratio, but that's just about 60 to 40% difference compared to 80 to 20% different in CKD. Again, using in the same region, data collected from the same region. So there is a gender differences, and there is a marked difference from the CKD due to common diseases like hypertension and diabetes versus CKDu in this province of North Central. So what are the other factors that can contribute to these chronic illnesses in general? Because CKD is a part of the chronic disease. Poverty is perhaps the number one. Poverty and malnutrition go together, especially the micronutrient deficiencies like selenium, zinc, and micronutrient like vitamins and minerals deficiency, causing the imbalance of the diet. They're having predominantly carbohydrate diet exceeding the 90% range, and then the engaging in harmful habits, the behavioral issue, and then the lack of understanding of personal action or perhaps inaction that are necessary and their consequences. And globally and the local government point of view is a misdirect or lack of fund for and the political interference or lack of support. What are the facts and also related to fertilizer and pesticide and their abuses? Let's look at that. So agriculture soil is a living ecosystem. So you cannot harm the environment or even the soil and expect everything to be normal. It's not going to happen. For example, the excess use of fertilizer can make the soil unhealthy. For example, if you put a phosphate, it's anything more than 60 parts per million, the soil will unable to retain that excess phosphate, and with the rain, and it going to leach out and go into streams and reservoirs, causing water eutrophication of with phosphates, and thereby or nitrate, and thereby causing the harm to the environment, including the algae blooms and sometimes the toxic products coming through those blue green algae. It also, you need to note that the not only synthetic fertilizer but also the compost manure or the organic fertilizer also pollute soil and increase, in fact, bioavailable metal toxins. Hill country farmers uses a higher amount of agrochemicals, all of them, including the fertilizer and pesticide compared to CKDu affected areas. Yet they do not have CKD in those regions, making it again unlikely that agrochemicals causing this particular disease. Let me give an example of the effect of erroneous policies that has negatively affected the country in general, not only for farmers' survival, but also gross downfall of the economies, particularly the tea export for the country. Glyphosate is the most used herbicide in the world. In fact, more than 80 to 85% of the herbicide market is run by glyphosate, millions of tons. New Zealand used 32 times higher than Sri Lanka, but not a single case of CKDu. State owners and the small-scale paddy growers are the most affected because they cannot afford the expensive labor to do the weeding. Glyphosate ban caused a third of the small tea state holdings struggle to survive, and some have already gone bankrupt. Loss from tea industry alone is currently estimated to be about 10 billion rupees per year for Sri Lanka. So the ban is not only unscientific, but the consequences of that economically is devastating for many people and the stakeholders. Secondly, this glyphosate is a class 2 toxin. Like many of the domestic products comes under this category, like soaps, kerosene, petrol, all of them comes under the class 2 toxin. But no compound has been banned to date based on the so-called precautionary principle on class 2 agents. It absolutely makes no sense of even following that area. There's no environmental or public health harm using glyphosate at the recommended doses. That's the conclusion for all the world bodies across countries. Based on global data, it's clear that there's no health risk or hazard, excess hazard to humans by using the recommended amount of glyphosate as we decide. Therefore, there's no justification at all for banning glyphosate or remaining the ban of glyphosate currently. Let's look at who gets CKDu in Sri Lanka and other part of tropical countries. Those who get CKDu are economically poor universally. Most daily wage earners, majority of them are malnourished, drinks less volume of polluted water over a period of time. All these things make them more vulnerable to have a renal failure. Let me give another example of that. The more is not always better. For example, overuse of fertilizer does not necessarily to increase the crop output after a certain point or earn higher income from agriculture. Instead, it pollutes the environment, wastes resources, and causes more environmental related negative outcomes. Well, here's an example. Depending on the soil, when one uses the fertilizer, the productivity slowly increases depending on the amount of agricultural fertilizers used. So the productivity increase up to a time, and beyond that, productivity actually start to go down. So it will never go more than the maximum ability of the crop. Yet it decreases output and waste of fertilizer, waste of funds for the government and for the farmers, and indeed it increases pollution, causing problems for everyone. So more is not necessarily the better. So what we call is the diminution of return with excessive usage of fertilizer. So it will go down with the excessive use and no benefit for anybody. Now, CKDu is although predominantly located in few districts in the dry zone, it is not restricted to North Central province in Sri Lanka. Clearly, the disease effects are going to affect the provincial, indeed the country economically, as I showed that a little while ago, region, and it could also affect globally with time. So, if we are not contain the disease, it can lead to a global socio-economic crisis. Clearly, the economic crisis is affecting those affected countries like Sri Lanka. The economy is already going down, partly due to CKDu related issues, and this will lead to a social and economic calamity unless the actions are taken to prevent the disease promptly. Unfortunately, the actions taken to date are too little, too late, and have a very, very little effect on preventive purposes. So here I have summarized the factors affecting the CKDu. From education and the poverty is a starting point, and then you can see the poverty and is linked to malnutrition, and also it also deals to behavior, what they eat, what they can afford to eat, and the lack of micronutrient availability. Indeed, oxidative stress damage to kidney cell is a final common pathway of harming the kidney. Therefore, if you can block this is happening, you should be able to protect the kidneys of those who are getting affected. On top of this, is a multiple factor interacting. That's why I call it a multifactorial disease. And there will be multiple ways we can intervene to prevent this disease, as many factors need to precipitate the renal failure. If we do that, we should be able to prevent kidney failure happening to start with. If we don't do that, these patients will end up with premature death, harming not only themselves, but also their families, communities, and the local economy in general. This slide summarizes a lot of data together to show an easy path for you to understand that the final common pathway of kidney damage, in this case the reactive oxygen nitrogen species induced renal tubular necrosis, can be any of these, and most likely the combination of some of these. So it is irrespective of whether it is to any of these factors, if we can prevent this happening, the excessive oxidative stress at the renal tubular level, we should be able to prevent renal harm and thereby protecting the kidneys and protecting the disease getting worse or actually prevented, and most certainly we can prevent the premature deaths of these communities. So we already have enough information on what causes the disease and how is causing the disease and what the final step in causing kidney damage. So there are ways we can intervene to prevent excessive oxidative stress even at the cellular level, but to date nothing has been done even to conduct some experiments to prove that it's a possibility or the test the hypothesis that if you block the excessive oxidative stress, we can prevent renal damage in humans. Clearly, this can be demonstrated easily in vitro cell culture or organ culture experiments. They're not that difficult to design and carry out, but to date, again, nothing such has been done to show in CKDu this is the path and how we could intervene effectively to prevent renal harm in these patients. So here's some of the potential association to CKDu. Association most certainly does not mean that these areas actually causing the disease. Firstly, harmful agricultural and other policies and prevalence of CKD in agricultural settlement region, particularly the newly colonized like Mahavali, Sea Calapia, Sea section as well. So these could have a clear be able to give us more clues on why this colonized area are particularly affected, whereas traditional villages in the same region are not affected. One of the clue actually, almost all the colonized area get their water through dug wells, and they get the shallow water, and 85 to 90% of the people who get in the disease drink water from either dug wells and or through tube wells. So how can we relate the lack of mindfulness to chronic diseases? Firstly, acquiring the negative personal habits, deviating from the cultural and the habits and indeed from the traditional diet, wrong beliefs and actions, conflict of interest at every level, including the government, and then the political squabbling and interference and lack of priority through the government point of view. And finally, the pilferage, selfishness, and the greed. I will discuss these in a different video because it takes a long time. And for the time being, let's move on to the public health and government policies, how these interact to either causing or prevent chronic diseases in a given society or the country. So what is going to need is a clean environment, which is the air, water, soil, or any other the area you live in general. So clean environment is always good for the health. Question is how this get polluted. So various ways of I have put it down here, but one of the key areas is a public health policy, either lack of it or even if you have the policies and laws, implementation of these laws are lax in most circumstances. So these lead to pollution, water and sanitation contamination, poor environmental conditions, and then leading to chronic diseases, which mostly are preventable. So now let's look at the behavioral changes I said before, which are needed to control chronic diseases. And clearly one simple approach is to use the mindfulness. In this regard, the introduction of mindfulness to school children through the Satipasala Foundation is a great example in Sri Lanka, how we could introduce these good habits to children. So once they become adults, actually they can take care of not only themselves, families, but also the country in general. So encouraging the lifestyle changes, we need to send them the clear, agreed messages. These need to be simple and straightforward. Message need to be personal, meaningful, and practical, and indeed has to be value added to person and the family. And there should not be a judgmental issue. And these messages must be reinforced with the facts, practicalities, and indeed has to have a common sense approach. So let's look at very briefly the use of mindfulness in mitigating chronic diseases, including CKDu. We need to focus on the current, not in the past or in the future. Positive thinking can do it. We need to collaborate with others, including the scientists, volunteerism, and helping each other, and both at the scientific level, at the ground level as well. Environmental friendly, sustainable living, that include the agriculture. Giving the need to the need and taking care of the family, community, and the surroundings, and indeed finally mindfulness, and the compassion for everybody. This is a slide I put together to show that water is in the center of our universe. Because as you see that it's virtually every ministry and every government department has a stake or a finger on water issues. This yet again show the problem associated with it. Because everybody has a finger on water, no one seems to be taking responsibility or accountability to having the water policy or having clean water to in this area. This slide summarizes the Vimala Foundation's projects and goals, how to eradicate CKDu. So basically we follow the same principles I have already discussed with you. Education and awareness, both farmers, local authorities and professionals, and the poverty alleviation through empowerment and the nutrition, and indeed the provision of clean water, which has gone a positive cycle in improving the quality of life, reducing the incidence and thereby reducing the prevalence of CKDu in communities, and eventually, if approaches are done properly, we should be able to eradicate the disease, as I show in the next couple of slides, within 15 years in Sri Lanka. So to do that, we need to have a simultaneous implementation of mindfulness-related projects. Number one is the provision of clean water to everybody, not only from Colombo and Kandy and cities. Now, changing habits and alleviation of malnutrition, which is poverty, and then sensible use of agrochemical across the country. Environment pollution protection is essential through the CEA and other organizations. Then education of public and the professional is paramount, which is lacking right now on this particular disease. And in the curtailing of illegal and harmful activities. Now, first four I have mentioned has the most effective, or what we call for the value for money compared to last three items has got a less value for money, although all these are not equally, all these are important, as I show in the next couple of slides, in eradication effort of CKDu. Here's a Pareto chart to show the effectiveness of various intervention, as I showed in the y-axis, like public education, education of professional, curbing illegal alcohol and tobacco. The important thing to realize that each has got some effectiveness in reduction of the incidence of the disease. For example, provision of clean, potable water has about 45% effect, although gradually decreasing effectiveness as you go on the x-axis. These are cumulative, so addition of these four factors can lead to 80% reduction of the incidence. But to achieve the 100% reduction, which eventually the eradication of disease, we need to implement everything, and perhaps a few more things to be added to this list. The fact is, if we do systematic and simultaneous intervention with specific proposal, with action, we can eliminate the disease by preventing the disease 100%, and thus with time, within 12 to 15 years time, the disease will be eradicated from the country. So that's very possible. Let me show you the estimated cost and effectiveness of eradicating CKDu from a country, in this case, especially for Sri Lanka. The slide on the top, A, is show the cost for the government over the next 15 years to eradicate the disease. These are in million US dollars. You can see that the most costly is the provision of clean water, because that be sustainable manner purified not by traditional method used by the water board. That may not be enough, because some of the smaller molecules coming from the surface water may not be purified using the traditional standard procedure. So slide on the bottom, which is slide B, shows the cost savings by the government over the next 15 years by implementing these actions, which cost about $15 to $16 million over 15 years' time, which is really the drop in the bucket compared to the waste of 15-20 billion right now happening per year due to the disease itself. Billion rupees actually. So as you see, the provision of water itself will have a tremendous effect of cost savings by almost like $125 million over the 15-year, same period of 15 years by investing about $15 to $20 million on prevention and eradicating CKDu from the country. Unfortunately, none has been done systematically, and even to date, after 20 years having the disease, only about 13 to 14% of the people in the affected region have access to safe, clean water. So the too little, too late, and many people are suffering and dying because of the lack of effective approaches taken by authorities in the country. So, in addition, more than 10-fold direct economic benefit, as you see from the chart, there'll be almost like 100-fold additional economic and social benefit you can get by preventing the disease. What you call the opportunity cost are prevented by eliminating the disease. So those are multiple significant benefit by investing rightly, for the right reason, and the right program simultaneously in the affected regions. So let me summarize what you said so far. First one is the CKDu is an environmentally induced occupational disease that's most likely spread by consuming polluted water as a main path of disease dissemination. So provision of clean water is the number one priority for not only for affected villages, but also the surrounding villages and indeed the entire affected regions. Cause is still not known, but the available data to date is sufficient, more than sufficient to take action to prevent its spread and preventing younger folks now getting the disease and dying early. We need a region-wise surveillance and prospective multidisciplinary long-term research program. I'm talking about at least 5, 10, 15-year program into the future, but very well designed on the multidisciplinary based actions. So CKD is aggravated by the malnutrition, which is the poverty, self-abuse, destruction of the environment. So we know what to do. We need to eliminate the malnutrition. We need to protect the environment. So we can do it right now. We don't need to wait to identify the specific cause to take action. That's merely a stupidity. So implementation of a multiple approach comprehensive action plan is essential starting soon as possible. Because every day, every week, every month we postpone, many innocent people are getting this disease for their death sentence for themselves and for their families. So we have a moral obligation to do it quickly. Using multiple simultaneous approaches, CKDu can be eradicated within 15 years. This assuming that all programs I discussed a few minutes ago are implemented simultaneously, efficiently, and cost effectively. So we should be able to get rid of this disease and preventing our farmers and other communities devastated by the CKDu. So disease prevention is essential using collaborative approach and the multidisciplinary approach, both not only scientific point of view, but also practical point of view to prevent the disease. Prevention is the cure. Building up hospitals, renal hospitals, or expanding dialysis centers is never going to cure the disease. Those are also while those are important to take care of the existing patient, our priority should be to prevent the disease so that the people will be healthy in the country. Thank you for your participation and being a great volunteer to work with us on prevention of CKDu with the goal of eliminating CKDu from this country and the other countries affected by the CKDu, and then follow the same protocols, same concept to adapt into their own countries to enabling them to eradicate this deadly disease. Here are some messages from the Wimlands Foundation. Conserve precious water. Recycle all materials. Don't pollute the environment. And preserve the environment for future generations to come. And here is some information about the foundation, and you are welcome to join us with projects or join us with our ongoing projects at any time. Thank you for your attention.